I know a lot of you are probably saying, no, how can you leave Fuji? How can you do this to us? It's true, I'm moving back to Sony, and I'm in the process of selling all my old Fujifilm gear, my Fuji X-H1, XT30, and a few of my other lenses that haven't been sold yet. And don't get me wrong, owning, using, and growing within the Fujifilm system has been a great experience for me. I actually learned a ton with these cameras. I've become a better videographer, a better editor. And in my 2 years with them, it's been a great experience, but as I'll explain throughout the video here, there are just a couple needs that aren't really being fulfilled by that gear. Even with Fuji's newer cameras right now, like the X-T4, which I recently had, and I'll explain why I returned it ultimately. All right, so you're probably thinking, well, what Sony camera or cameras are you getting? What lenses are you getting? And those are all good questions, but it's not the main point of this video, and I'll take you there. I'll tell you what I got. First, you gotta hear the journey of how I got there so you can kind of understand the thought process behind the gear I've bought and why I think it's gonna be a better fit than the X-H1, the XT30, and even the X-T4. Look at that face tracking. Just sticking to me. Go in, go out. And would you believe that this new camera that we'll be revealing in this video costed effectively under $400. I plan on doing some behind the scenes tours of this office showing you how I've kind of built it up and some of the unique features to it, as well as some of the weird ways I'm mounting my lights. Trying to figure out the mic placement. We have a lot of echoes. This is a relatively large room, so I think I'm gonna need to actually get some sound panels to kind of dampen the echo that we're kind of getting there. But it's all getting worked out, and hopefully within the next few videos we can kind of fine tune these little details. But on to today's topic, and it's a juicy one. How juicy? Taking you on the journey of how I'm moving away from my Fujifilm gear, moving into Sony, actually moving back to Sony, why myself as a videographer, why I'm finding Sony's cameras and lenses to be the better choice for me in how I film and edit my videos. My goal with this video, and hopefully it becomes clear, is not to convince you to move to Sony, not to move away from Fujifilm. I'm not trying to tell you that Fujifilm is not a great choice. Instead, I want to give you specific examples of the pros and cons using Fujifilm and Sony, explaining why Sony ultimately comes out on top for what I need. Because the truth is, my Fujifilm gear is still great and still does the job. It's just that it currently has and has had a lot of quirks and frustrations that made it less ideal. But if you're on the edge of your seat and you just want the quick and dirty answer, you can skip ahead to this timestamp where I just give you the summary of the entire video near the end there, explaining to you what Sony cameras I'm moving to and the quick thought process behind it. If you're interested in learning more about the gear I use in my top recommendations, you can use the affiliate links down below, save a bunch of money, as well as help support the channel in doing so. And because I'm extra nice, I've also included timestamps throughout this video so you can kind of skip ahead to the parts that are most interesting to you, especially if you want to learn or relate to certain parts of the journey that I'm about to take you on. For those of you though that are patient enough to stick around and actually experience this whole journey in full, I think you'll actually appreciate hearing the different chapters of camera gear that I've had and kind of the thought process behind buying each of them and why I sold them, eventually bringing us to present day and why we're now moving again from Fujifilm to the Sony. But before we get into the meat of all that, we have a quick word from today's video sponsor. Ads suck. Yeah, ads suck, but you know what even sucks more? Not having good audio, sound effects, or even stock footage to choose from if you need it for your videos. Editing is already a tough process, so you don't need to make it any more complicated than it already is. You've probably heard by now, but good audio and sound design is often and frequently more important than the actual video visuals. And when done right, can be a really strong driving force for your video. And sure, you can have the most epic visual shots, but if you don't have those ear-pleasing soundscape, music, to help drive that video, it's not gonna land with your audience as well. And so I've been using today's sponsor, Artlist, to find stock music, sound effects, and even now, stock footage. Artlist makes it simple with an affordable, flat monthly fee. Get unlimited access to their entire library, no restrictions for the kind of projects you can do. Using my special link, you can actually save a ton on your membership. Not only that, using Artlist will save you time, money, and make the editing process much better. Thanks again for checking them out. About 4 years ago, I bought my first interchangeable mirrorless camera, Panasonic Lumix G7. Right away, I was impressed by the incredible 4K video you could actually get out of this little cheap bundle that I bought for about maybe $500. This was really my first time experiencing a semi-pro camera, and definitely my first time ever experiencing 4K quality video. I started to learn things like depth of field, frame rates, white balance, and just the general experience of setting up and getting a pleasing shot. At its time, and even today, if you can find a used one, It's a really good value camera and a great entry camera. Like a lot of people when they take up videography as a new hobby at first, you soon outgrow it, you soon start to realize some of the limitations of your gear and you want to upgrade. In my case here with the Lumix, the biggest struggles I had were poor autofocus, poor low light performance, and a really limited lens selection. Under ideal shooting situations, I was able to get really cool video out of it. I started to realize that that kit wasn't cutting it for me anymore. So about a year into owning that camera, I decided it was time to upgrade. I actually ended up making a bit of a profit on that camera because for whatever reason, even though its new prices were about, like I said, $400 or $500, the used prices about a year later skyrocketed to about $600. Looking for a new camera at this point, I had done a lot of research. Sony was definitely starting to get on my radar, but I was also learning about other brands as well. I was definitely more familiar with the APS-C options and was leaning more towards those just because I realized from my budget and my needs at the time, I didn't need full frame and I probably couldn't really afford getting a decent setup. I figured with my then slightly raised budget of about $700, I wanted an APS-C camera with better low light performance and better autofocus compared to the Lumix. And so I found the A6300, it fit the bill nicely. Looking back when I first got it, I think I was really most excited for that low light legendary performance it touted. I just kept watching back-to-back all these low light video tests using the Sony A6300. And I was just blown away and I'm like, I need one of these. And when mine finally arrived, it definitely didn't disappoint, especially when I paired it with a Sigma 30mm f1.4 that I soon bought after. Autofocus, of course, was another big improvement for me, and it was actually something that I could start to rely on and actually trust that it was focused on my subject as well as me, because at that time I'd started to do these kind of style of videos, tutorials, reviews, and things like that. So that became my go-to camera to film myself with. But like with a lot of upgrades that you get, sometimes they actually have a few quirks or issues compared to the thing you upgraded from. In this case with the Sony A6300, it fell short in two ways compared to that Lumix. The first was a lack of a flip-out screen. This older Lumix, which was almost 2/3 of the price of the Sony, had it, so I was really surprised that a newer, larger, and more pro-level camera didn't have a flip-out screen. The other thing I didn't like as much was the color science of that camera. I found Panasonic's colors to be more pleasing when I was editing them, and even when you shot in a flat picture profile, I found getting nice and pleasing skin tones was really difficult. There were a few other minor things that I'll just quickly mention, including rolling shutter, which I'd never experienced with a Panasonic before. But soon after owning that Sony A6300, videography and video editing had quickly become not just a hobby, but also a source of income for me. At this point, as I wanted to continue to grow within that field, I would start to need to expand my kit, probably get a B camera, as well as some other lenses to fit the gaps. Being that I wasn't really heavily invested in the Sony ecosystem at that point, I was relatively flexible as far as do I either upgrade and continue with Sony, or do I completely switch? And this is where it starts to get interesting. If you're looking at our timeline, we're now in late January in the beloved and misty year of 2019. Camera rumors and announcements are flying left and right, demanding your attention. Which camera do you get next? Here's the next great thing with several upgrades over the previous generation. But in enters a new contender. About a month later, the Fuji XT30 got its official announcement. Once those initial review and comparison videos start to flood the internet, I'm watching all of them. I'm watching all of them a lot of times, just trying to see which one does better here? Oh, which one should I get? But again, the Sony A6400 didn't really seem to be much different than the A6300. At its core, it essentially had the same body and same sensor. Oh, it's got a newer processor, but what does that really mean? Well, it means a lot, in fact, as we'll later learn. A lot of the things going for the Fuji XT30 were that larger, newer 26 megapixel sensor that offered 4K 30 without crop, 1080p slow motion with better autofocus, as well as the ability to shoot 10-bit externally, something I never did, but had the option to. Those Fuji colors, and once you look at them, you're like, whoa, that's nice. But you also can't forget those retro looks. In fact, most people, and when you glance at them quickly, can't distinguish the difference between this Nikon film camera and this new mirrorless XT20. So yeah, I was definitely focused a lot on the spec sheet, as well as something that was completely new and just looked so cool. Not that those are necessarily bad things you should be considering, but they're definitely not telling the full picture. But we're talking about the XT30 now. Why do I have an XT20? Yeah, it gets weird. And so there were obviously a couple important things that I was missing. First off, the Fuji XT30, when you shoot 4K, has a 10-minute record limit. The the Sony a6400 is unlimited. And I probably knew about it, but didn't really think much of it because I just didn't realize how inconvenient having to stop and restart your video every 10 minutes, but also remembering to do so and not to continue rambling on. Remember, these don't have flip out screens, so you can't really easily tell when they're recording. Sure, there's that tally light, but you sometimes forget, especially when there's a lens in front of it. You're not gonna see that. That and a couple other things proved to be really problematic for me with the XT30. But like they say, hindsight is 2020. Before buying any gear, I usually look for used or open box deals. I'm typically not an early adopter for brand new release technology. I don't usually jump to get something once it's announced. More about that later, But I'll quickly tell you another big reason why I went with the XT30 over the a6400, and that's value, or supposed value. Both were priced about the same, $899 for their body, $999 with their kit lens. But Fuji stood out because there were sites like Adorama, which I got mine from, which included really nice prime lenses in their bundle when you pre-ordered them for not much more. I got the, what was it? The 35mm? I got the 35mm f2 for $99 extra to my order. A $400 lens, I got it for a quarter of its price. There wasn't anything like that going on for the Sony deals. And the other thing I was considering, the Fujifilm's kit lens, the 15-45, I still have that. This little guy, the 15-45, is better than Sony's 16-50. This frequently considered pretty trashy. I mean, it's all right, especially when you're just starting out and learning, but in general, this is a pretty bad lens. Fujifilm's 15-45 though, you can pretty much get really good results, and it's something that I was proud to actually keep in my kit. It was a great lens. Are you scratching your head and thinking, why does he have a 16-50 an APS-C Sony lens? But yeah, I went with the Fuji XT30. Had it for a while, I actually liked it for a while, and I'll start by telling you some of the things that I really liked and the main improvements that I found compared to the older a6300 I just sold. Better colors, check. Better 1080p with slow motion? Yeah, especially with slow motion, way better. Higher bit rates. 200 megabits per second in 4K, less rolling shutter, way better. Is it more, I don't know, ergonomic, easier to hold? Yeah, and those retro dials at the top there were fantastic and something I'm definitely gonna miss. Altogether, in direct comparison to upgrading from the a6300, I felt like I was getting better photos and videos out of this new kit. But like I was saying, I didn't realize how important those software and processor upgrades in that little camera was, and how much I would come to crave them. Oh, but we're far from getting to that point. No, when it came to me sitting down and doing my first initial review and impressions of the camera, this is where things got kind of bad. When I did my test footage outside and the cinematics and all of that, it all looked so beautiful. And again, the direct head-to-head comparisons between with Sony to that, especially the kit lenses specifically, without a doubt, the Fuji was way better. But filming myself with that Fuji XT30 and using either of those two lenses I had, either the kit lens or that 35mm f2, was a horrible experience. First, I didn't have a field monitor. When I had the Sony, I used to film myself and I was able to frame and get everything in line really easily using their mobile app. It worked well, it connected relatively reliably. Fujifilm, and to this day still has this problem, has a horrible camera app that frequently doesn't even pair with your smartphone. So in that sense, while not the biggest issue, I'm like, uh-oh, this is gonna be difficult. But after a lot of setup, I finally get, the angle shot that I want. And I hit record. And that's where Fuji delivered the old knockout! First, and if you're a Fujifilm user, you probably saw this coming. Autofocus. I've talked about this so much on my previous videos. I always talk about this, but Fujifilm, for whatever reason, even with the latest X-T4, which I had, even when it looks like it's focused on you, has a box around your face or has eye detect on, it still likes to breathe. I don't know why. Every single lens I've used, including third-party lenses and some of their more expensive first-party lenses, all suffered from this. I like to use autofocus continuous. And I know when you're shooting professional videos, you're not gonna do that, but when you're doing talking head portions of videos like this, having smooth continuous autofocus, something that you can rely on, it's powerful. But I hear you. Some of you can move past that, and sure, it's not a deal breaker quite yet. Maybe this is what I was hoping and what I keep hoping for with Fujifilm. Future software upgrades. It's in its infancy. Maybe, they'll update it, and between the lens firmware upgrades and the body firmware upgrades, it'll get better. And perhaps it did slightly over time and might be a little bit better now, although I doubt it because again, the X-T4 was still riddled with those same problems. But yeah, that 10-minute record time limit, what's up with that? There would be so many times, especially in the beginning when I was still learning about that, I would be recording forever, not realizing, oh, you stopped recording 20 minutes ago. Even when I was recording alone at home, I was ashamed. I wouldn't leave my room just because I had known what I had done. It was just so bad. And to re-record those same parts over again, this next one was unforgivable. After 20 minutes of recording in 4K, guess what? The thing likes to overheat. You maybe have about 5 to 10 minutes more, but it's gonna shut down on you. Video's over, done, you're out of here. If you've been watching my videos and you've seen my review on the X-T30 and a lot of the update videos I've done since having it, you'll know that these were the struggles I was dealing with. At this point, discovering those issues, I should have probably decided, hey, maybe I need to bite the bullet and just switch out of Fujifilm. I don't think this is gonna be a good choice for the kind of videos I'm trying to create. The story gets weird though, because instead of doing that, again, I was thinking, firmware updates maybe? Because I think I was promised and had this really high expectation for this camera. I knew the potential it could have, because when it worked well, it was great. The video quality out of it looked fantastic. The thing is though, and a lot of people will tell you this, once you get a taste of that Fuji juice, you can't just leave. Ignorance is bliss, because the obvious solution would have been, hey, that A6400, which you overlooked before, it's still within your budget. You can sell a lot of your Fuji gear and not lose too much and pick up that Sony. You had a great experience with it before. But no, I went in a different and more interesting direction, because this is where I started to think, 𝗖𝗺𝗾, what's up with that? I see that I can actually start to get handheld shots that look fantastic without the need of a gimbal or shooting in slow motion. The XH1, this is a beast. Right before Fujifilm announced that I was discontinuing that line, Amazon had this fantastic sale where I think for about $800, maybe $850 with that battery grip. The XH1 is a power horse. I love this camera. It's really reliable. I haven't really had much complaints or downsides to it aside from the same autofocus problems with the XT30, as well as still lacking a flip out screen. But here's why I went with that and why it was actually a good choice and worked out really well for my needs at the time. 𝗖𝗺𝗾 was a big game changer for me and just opened up a whole new world of how I could film video, especially, like I said, handheld, and it just made run and gun shoots way easier. On top of that, it has fantastic heat dissipation. It's got fans built into it. It never overheated. Another big thing that was a huge upgrade, it had record limits of 30 minutes instead of 10 minutes. Still not a perfect solution, but way better. And even though that's an older camera to the X-T30 and kind of had some downgrades in terms of processor and sensor, overall, I was still very pleased with the video and photo quality I was getting out of it. And because I was now getting 𝗖𝗺𝗾 in it, I was getting better video. The only downsides to it, I'd say, compared to the X-T30 were that it was bigger, heavier, so it made it just a little bit harder to carry around, as well as it didn't work with my smaller 𝗖𝗺𝗾𝗆 Crane M, the original one, not the M2 that I now have. I think the XH1 is a good exposition point of this story, but we have a few side characters coming into play real quick. At this point, a lot of my filming projects started to need a beat camera. It was less important and the beat camera didn't need to be as special. I ultimately ended up with the X-T20 as my beat camera and it worked out really well. In terms of performance, it had very similar 4K video quality and good enough for my needs. It lacked that nice Eterna video profile that the XH1 and the X-T30 and all the newer Fujifilm cameras have. But aside from that, for my needs as a beat camera, it fit the bill really well. You may or may not know this from social media, but I actually, even right before that, for just a few weeks, had, and I knew it wouldn't work out, the Fuji X-A5, a very budget camera, but I got a great deal on it with a kit lens included for $250. I basically just got that for a lightweight photography camera for the time being, and I knew I could flip that really well until I found a better deal on a beat camera. Of course, I ended up with the X-T20. It worked out well, still have it. I actually just sold it today, so that's gonna get shipped out after I wrap up this video. But nothing too special with that. What was great about it is it reminded me how awesome it was to have a lightweight camera setup, similar to when I had the X-T30 and before that the A6300. Just having a smaller overall body means you're more likely to want to take it out, especially on those smaller shoots where you don't need the performance and all the features out of that bigger X-H1. You still with me? I think this is the part a lot of you are interested in and perhaps even skipped to. The Fuji X-T4. It was here on the channel not too long ago, but didn't stay for very long. What's up with that? You know what really made me realize that the Fuji X-T4 was not gonna be the camera for me? Overheating. What? When I shoot my wedding videos, I like to shoot in 60 FPS, so I have the ability to record audio as well as slow it down later if I need to. And now that the Fuji has that 4K with 60 FPS, the big selling feature, that overheats at about the 25 to 30 minute mark. When I do shorter individual clips, even when doing that for a couple hours, it wouldn't overheat, you wouldn't get that warning. But once it came time for the ceremony and you wanted to do 4K 60 for that longer chunk of time, that's gonna overheat really quickly, and you either need to let it cool down for a bit, or you need to switch down to 4K 24, or switch even to 1080p. So the overheating is present, it can be avoided, but for one of the main selling features, one of the reasons I was paying for this premium new camera was so I could use that 4K 60. But now you're telling me, very similar to, you know, Canon, oh, you got 8K. Yeah, but you can only use it for like 10 minutes before it overheats. And so as improved and very appealing that X-T4 was, I realized it's still not fixing all those ongoing issues I have with Fujifilm. And like with all my other previous Fujifilm cameras, I had high expectations for it. I felt, oh, maybe this is the one. But ultimately, I was kind of disappointed. And the other thing was, those really nice new 4K video bit rates we had, very difficult to edit. It was adding additional time and frustration to my editing workflow that just wasn't worth that additional quality I was getting from it. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 3 or 4 more times, just kill me. Finally, we're at a point where we should have been far earlier in our story. I should have been here a year ago. So this isn't gonna be an easy thing to do. I mean, switching ecosystems is never really easy, but sometimes you got to do it, especially if there's a significant upgrade to another camera line that you just have to have, or if you have a crippling issue with your current camera system that you just need to overcome. And honestly, this is actually a pretty exciting and relatively easy time to be upgrading and switching camera systems, because every manufacturer for the most part is releasing something that's pretty good, exciting, and has a lot of improvements over what I currently have. But again, using some research and based on the things I've been saying, there's probably one main camera. So let's quickly recap. I needed 2 cameras. I needed an A camera, a B camera. My A camera is the workhorse, similar to that XH1, where it needs to have the improved specs, especially for that kind of run and gun style of shooting that I keep saying that I love to do. And I like to also be pretty streamlined. I don't want to always need a gimbal, so IBIS was a must. I do a lot of slow motion recording. Since trying out 4K 60 on the Fuji X-T4, I knew that that was something I wanted to have on my new A camera, because it's pretty night and day difference, and it complements and fits into your workflow of other clips, especially when the rest of your timeline is 4K. Sometimes it can be kind of obvious when you switch to a 1080p slow motion clip. The big thing, of course, and not just for the A camera as well as the B camera, but it had to have excellent autofocus. Something I could rely on. I wanted face tracking, I wanted eye tracking, and if possible, subject tracking. Similar to that, just overall excellent slow motion performance. Like we said, at least 4K 60. If we can do more than that, even better. For example, if we have 240 FPS that's actually usable in 1080p, 10-bit internal recording, longer battery life, definitely no overheating. Flip out screen is a must. It's gotta have weather sealing. A good lens selection. I don't need all the lenses, but a good enough lens selection, and native lenses ideally. So let's not dance around. Probably pretty obvious, isn't it? The Sony A7S III is the choice I made. I mean, duh, right? I mean, you probably knew that a long time ago. I've hinted at it for a long time. Talked about it on social media. I mean, you're following me there, right? You knew it was coming. It ticked all those boxes. A lot of people say it's the perfect camera. I'm not gonna go into the details of why. I don't personally have one yet. I don't know that it is. I don't wanna overpromise. Not that there really is ever a perfect camera within 6 months or a year. I mean, there's always gonna be something better. But at this current time and for my current needs, as well as the fact that my current needs haven't really changed too dramatically over the past 2 or even 4 years, the Sony A7S III just seems like a good value and something that can last for a while and maintain the kind of video quality that I want to produce, not just for these kind of videos, but for my clients as well. A couple of the other contenders I was considering a little bit, the Panasonic S5 was one of them. For its price, it's actually a pretty good camera, but it falls short in a couple of ways. Pretty poor autofocus, so strike. Its lens selection still sucks. And it has some pretty dramatic crops in 4K, which not a huge deal breaker, but something I definitely didn't want. Okay, we've also got Canon, the R5 and the R6. Well, both overheat. A lot of their more exciting 4K modes have recording limits. So with that, yeah, the Sony a7S III is pretty much the best choice right now. Not just for myself, I mean a lot of other people have very similar needs, and that's why there's so much demand for it. That's why it's back ordered. The only real downside to it, I'd say, which is also one of its greatest pros, is that 12 megapixel sensor. It's gonna be really good in low light, but means it's not gonna be as great for taking high quality photos. But again, we still have the option for a B camera, which can kind of fill some of those gaps of this bigger Sony. But what are we thinking? We're sticking with Sony, obviously, because we want to use the same lenses between them. And my thought instantly when I decided I wanted the a7S III is all my lenses are going to be full frame lenses. My B camera, however, is probably going to be an APS-C camera. Maybe I can get a good deal on a used a7 III, but I don't really need it. In fact, we're talking about that really cool autofocus performance, subject tracking and stuff like that, all things that the a7S III has. But coming full circle, you know who also has that and has had that for a really long time? That a6400. The a7S-C got recently announced, and it looks cool. It looks like in many ways an improved a7 III with some maybe weird quirks too, but it has that better autofocus we were talking about. But it's also about $1,800. So way more than I wanted to spend for my B camera. And in fact, I knew I could get many of the features of that a7C on the older, much cheaper, and slightly smaller a6000 series. I did find a lot of pretty good deals open box and used for the a6400 for about $700 to $750. But what I ended up picking, and amazingly found a pretty darn good deal on, is this guy, which is very similar to the a6400, but far cheaper. And the video you've been seeing this whole time is actually shot on the Sony a6100, not the a6400. I got this for $700, used, open box, with 2 lenses. You remember that 15 to 50 lens that I was talking so poorly about earlier? That was included in this kit, as well as the 55 to 210. But weren't you just saying a second ago that you're only going to be doing full frame lenses? What's the point of that? I mean, that doesn't really make much sense. Well, yeah, but this kit was $700. I'm planning on selling both of those lenses and making at least, hopefully, $300. So that makes the effective cost of this Sony a6100 about $400, if not less. For a B camera that has this kind of video quality, similar to the a6400, something that is pretty well matched to the a7S III, something that I think for my needs as a B camera can match pretty nicely and complement pretty nicely to the a7S III, it was a no-brainer. And even if I don't like it, I'm pretty sure I can flip this and upgrade to the a6400 if I need some of those very minor upgraded features that the a6400 has. So let's quickly talk about those. The only real main difference between this and the a6400 is the video picture profiles. But my experience shooting with this so far is that you can actually achieve relatively flat in camera and just grade it as needed. I don't, again, need this to have all the top tier features of the a7 III, or the a7S III, excuse me. This is just my B camera. When I'm doing these kind of videos here and I just need another angle in the corner, like on a tripod or something like that, this is doing it. Even if I could get like the a7 III for like say $1,000, I still think this was the better option for me because of this improved tracking, this improved autofocus. Like I kept saying in the beginning, some of these other internal features, the actual processing and brain behind the camera itself is also extremely important and valuable. As I continue to learn and use this camera, it's gonna be an exciting experience. Not a lot of videos have been made on the a6400, so I definitely wanna take a deeper dive and actually show you how I was able to achieve this more flat picture profile, as well as show you the kind of video quality you can get out of this very cheap and often overlooked camera. But my thought is, and even for me, this is enough for these kind of videos. So it might be enough for your kind of style of videos too, if that's all you need, because this is a fantastic camera. I haven't talked about lenses at all because I don't think that's as important. The main thing I want to tell you about lenses is I'm growing my kit right now with a variety of lenses, and I have a couple more getting shipped out to me right now. Sony has one of the largest, if not the largest, selection of full frame lenses. This is the Zeiss 16-35 f4 lens, and in a future update video, I'll tell you about the other lenses I got and the reasons behind them, as well as some of the ways I was able to get some pretty good deals on them. But in my time using this as my B camera, as well as my current A camera in some projects I've done, it's been very satisfying. It's been very easy to use, and again, those improvements in autofocus and eye tracking and things like that have been a huge help, and I really appreciate them. Quick recap, you skipped to this point, didn't you? I mean, I gave you the timestamp and I said, hey, if you just want the quick and dirty answer, you can come to this point. My two new cameras are the Sony a7S III. Maybe not much of a surprise, but that's one. That's the 8 camera, and I'm excited for that. Today is the 24th of September, so this is the official release date of it. I pre-ordered it about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting on it to get shipped out, and who knows when that's going to arrive, hopefully within a couple weeks. And when we do get it, we can actually take a deeper dive and explain and show specific examples of the ways this is a far better camera than what I've had before. Interestingly, and I told you why just a bit ago, if you want to skip back to that part, that's my B camera, the Sony a6100. Yep, you heard that right. Not the a6400, not the a6600, and not the newly released or announced whatever a7C. I recently just shared a couple of the main reasons why it's such a good B camera for me and possibly for you, and even might be a good A camera for you, because in many ways this is a much more usable camera for my style of shooting because of its improved autofocus and the flip up screen. I didn't even mention that. It's got a flip up screen, which is way better than no flip up screen of the XT20. Yes, if you missed that part too, the XT20 was previously my B camera, and in many ways this has upgrades over the previous B camera, as well as, and if you missed it, my previous A camera, the XH1. Yes, compared to Fujifilm, you do lose out on that Fuji juice. We talked about that as well. I mean, that's where we have this love for the colors, the retro feel, and it just gives you a certain quality to your video that when done properly is fantastic. But often to get that, you're dealing with a lot of compromises. Again, the main one being poor autofocus, as well as some of the other video related limitations, including recording limits, as well as more recently with the XT4, as well as the XT30, which I previously had. You really can't have that for professional video recording. And the main point I was trying to drive home with all those points was, these cameras are great, but when you're trying to crank out videos quickly, when you're trying to capture that shot the first time, especially when you don't have the ability to redo that scene, you will frequently, unfortunately, miss the shot because it's either out of focus or it overheated, or you're dealing with one of its other limitations that a lot of cameras have overcome already. If you followed along with the whole journey, you hopefully took away an important point that specs aren't everything. You know, there's a bigger picture to look at. What are you using the camera for? What do you need out of your camera gear? Do you currently have something that has limitations? Well, think about that specifically. What are those limitations? And are there any other pieces of gear or cameras that you know for sure don't have those issues? Looking back, and again, hindsight 2020, blah, 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 I knew that Sony's a6400 had significantly improved autofocus and was probably the right choice at the time. But I still went with Fujifilm because it was the new thing, it looked great and offered a lot of spec bumps and improvements, which I thought I needed, but ultimately weren't as important as that improved autofocus that the a6400 and that other new refreshed a6000 series offered. We've gone on for long enough, we've talked about a lot of details. If you're interested in anything specific and want me to dive deeper into them, just leave a comment down below and let me know. I hope you liked this journey. This was a fun video to make. Again, to really understand it, to relate to this story, and to hopefully take something out of it, I felt like it was important to actually go through each of those stages and chapters in my life as a videographer and video editor, so you can kind of see the thought process behind it and hopefully learn along with me from my mistakes as well as the things that worked out well for me. It's gonna be exciting, especially with that a7 III, and I'm even still excited as I'm learning more about this a6100 and the things that I can just capture with it now just far more easily. If you're interested in learning more and continuing with this journey here as I grow as a videographer and video editor, be sure to subscribe and like the video down below. Show your support, show your love, you know, add some comments down below as well. Help this channel out. Thanks again for watching this video, of course. Of course, you still got those affiliate links down below. Save yourself some money with some great deals that I'm sharing down below there. You know, you're also helping the channel out by using those links, and it's at no cost to you. Thank you for doing so. And until the next one, as always,